Hey guys, I just wanted to come on today and make a quick video about removing the transmission in a first gen DSM. I've done this several times and I figure a good step-by-step wouldn't be a bad thing to have on YouTube just for future reference. My car is a 92 6-bolt all-wheel drive, and so this will vary between front-wheel drives and all-wheel drives. Front-wheel drives being quicker and easier, all-wheel drives having to deal with the transfer case and rear drive shaft. There are a few things about my car that's a little bit different that'll make my job a little easier than yours if you're on a stock car. The intercooler piping, battery, and airbox setup is completely different. I relocated my battery to the trunk. I highly recommend, if you're taking your transmission out, just to remove your battery tray. That'll give you all the room in the world to work in there, especially if you're front-wheel drive. And then a couple other things, just to take off your air intake to your turbo, or if you're naturally aspirated, to your throttle body. And then it's pretty straight shooting after that. Alrighty, so I took my air intake tube off and my intercooler pipe here off. Again, going to be different for you if you're stock, if you're side mount intercooler. I have a big front mount intercooler on my car. Next thing we're going to attack here is we're going to take our shift linkage off and then go for our starter next. Our shift linkage usually just has these two pins. Mine are awkward bent pieces of wire because that's something I put in there. And they have these two tabs right here. Easiest thing I found with these is just to take a set of channel lock pliers and put it on there and just pull those tabs straight up for both shift linkages, and then pull these pins out. These will just slide off here and you're good to go. And they are just that easy. I've had some on some cars that I've had to be stubborn, but for the most part, just pull those up just like that, and then you're free on your linkage there. Here we are with our shift cables out of the way. What we're going to do next is our starter. And so I have a secondary ground here that I put on. I believe that this bolt actually does have a ground on it from the factory as well. And so our starter is just two 14mm bolts. One of them is right here, and one of them is down there. So just on either side of the starter right there, both 14s. I just personally, when I do a transmission job like this, I leave my starter wires connected. Make sure you disconnect the battery first, or else you could have all sorts of fun. But you could just leave your starter connected. That's it sitting right there. Just push it back, and then I just set it on my subframe back here usually. So we'll take that starter off real quick here. Alrighty, so I got my starter out. Just pulled it back and plopped it up over on top of the engine mount over here. It'll be just fine right there, and then I don't have to disconnect anything else. It is ready to rock and roll. While you're in here, and you probably won't have this coolant hose because I added that. While you're in here, that's your speedometer cable. You shouldn't need any tools. If you got a strong grip, if it's been on there for a million years, you might put a set of pliers on it. Just unscrew right there. And it should unscrew right from your transmission and pull out like that with one keyway in there. Alrighty, now we're underneath the car. I'm lucky enough to be working on a lift today. I've done this job both on and off the lift. It is pretty easily doable either way. But you know, when you have access to a lift, you may as well take it. So here I am on the lift today. Here's underneath the vehicle. Since this one's all-wheel drive, it's got some different things going for it. I'm going to have to remove my downpipe, which is one of the things I don't love doing on this car, to be completely honest with you. Not my favorite. But I'm gonna have to do it because I have to pull my transfer case out. You front-wheel drive guys are lucky. I've done this more times on front-wheel drive than all-wheel drive, and that is honestly just easier. But I do enjoy all-wheel drive, so here we are. I will be pulling my transfer case out of this unit, and then with that, just hanging this rear drive shaft up there, looping around with the zip tie. I'll take some more pictures for you guys as I'm going along. But yeah, that's my next thing. I'll take the exhaust off. Front wheel drive guys do not have to take your exhaust off, so please don't do that because you won't like yourself for doing it. But yeah, I'll get rolling on this transfer case really quick, and then I'll get back with you guys. Alright, you all-wheel drive guys, do this how you like. What I like to do is take my drive shaft, tie a zip tie to the exhaust support right here, and I do that before I take any bolts off, just in case, who knows why, something might fall or something. I'm going to be supporting this by that. I'll tighten the zip ties when I take the transfer case off, so my drive shaft's not just hanging and my yoke gets banged up or whatever. It has 17 millimeter bolts. You got 5 of them. One here, one, it's hard to see. One up there, yep, right there. And then the 3, 1, 2, 3. So those 17s, you pull those off and your whole transfer case will just right over to the side here. And then from that point, it just slips out of this yoke right here. So that's why I have this supported, right? So that won't go crazy. Just pull your transfer case off. I recommend keeping this tilted up if you're trying to save your fluid. It will not leak out of the front, so just keep that untilted up, and then you don't have to refill your transfer case all the way. I use Redline fluid. It's expensive, so if I can save it, I will. Alrighty, our transfer case slid off perfectly. You just undo those bolts and pop it off. Since I had my zip tie here, my drive shaft didn't fall. Always a good thing. And then the genius I feel about this is then I can just tighten up my zip tie. Well, my several zip ties, I should say. I used to have some big ones, and I just don't know where they went, so now I have a lot of little ones. All right, now your drive shaft is supported, it's out of the way, and when you put this back together, you can just pop it right back in and hang it right back up. It works really, really well. That's a pretty good way of doing things, I think. So, again, all-wheel drive problems, front-wheel drive people, you won't have this. You're gonna wanna take this here cross member off. I'm missing a bolt, so it's going to be especially easy for me. But there's just a bolt here, and then I think 3 bolts up here. So you just take this cross member off. I'm going to try to rush this job a little bit and film a little less. You have this half shaft, which is just supported by these 2, I believe, 14 millimeter bolts right there, supporting your half shaft, and this half shaft will just pull out of the transmission. Then you're ready to move on to axles after that. Alrighty, at this point, we have our cross member out. We want to remove this slave cylinder for the clutch system. That's just going to be 2 12 millimeter bolts. Mine has a 12 and a 13 because hardware stores like their 13s, and I'm a bolt breaker. What can you do? So I have a 12 and a 13, but just these 2 12 millimeter bolts right here. You can get to it with an extension or ratchet, no problem. And then you'll have your slave cylinder off. It is usually attached up here. I completely forgot to hook that up last time I put my engine in. So it's not. There is also a ground cable right here. It's a 12 millimeter. So pull that ground cable off, because last thing you want is this transmission in your arms all the weight of it, and then next thing you know, you got a ground cable and you're like, oh my gosh, what do I do about that? So pull the ground cable off, pull your slave cylinder off, and then you can just sling this whole guy up to the side over there. All right, so now we're here. We have the wheels off the car, and we're going to remove our axles because those are into the transmission, of course. On a front wheel drive, this is the same on both sides. Essentially, they both just, this one shoots straight into the transmission, no big deal. On an all-wheel drive, you have this half shaft situation, so let me show you. The first thing you're going to need to do is disconnect your strut, and this is pretty easily doable to pop an axle out, I feel, for a lot of cars. These 2 bolts right here, 17 millimeters on both sides. If you have a big impact gun, I highly recommend you use it. It'll make your life a whole lot easier. 17 millimeter, take those out. And then my bolts broke on my struts, so I have the hose clamp situation going on here, which if your bolt breaks, this is by far the best way. It is so nice and easy to work with every time. But on the back of this strut, there's a 12 millimeter bolt that normally holds this on, this brake hose. And so you just disconnect the 12 millimeter, take out these 2 17 millimeters, and then you have your axle nut right here. It's usually got a cotter pin through it. I think this is a 32 millimeter. I have a 33 millimeter socket that is loose but works with my big impact, just because I'm too cheap to buy a 32. But I believe this is a 32 from the factory. And then once you're to that point, you can stick a Harbor Freight pry bar. I'll show you. Well, I'll pause. I'll get this all taken out, and then I'll show you actually pulling the axle. All right, I lifted the car a little bit more in the air. As you can see, those 2 17s popped out, took my hose clamp off here, and then removed my axle nut. Once the axle nut's removed, this will just hang down, and your axle can just easily pull right out of there. So I like to pull it out and just kind of set it loosely right there. And then this breaker bar from Harbor Freight, I don't know why, but I have spent some time pulling DSM axles with about every tool you can imagine, and this breaker bar is by far the tool that you need to have. So if you don't have one of these, I would run to Harbor Freight and I would grab one, because this breaker bar will make your job very easy. On the all-wheel drive side, I'll just show you in here. On the all-wheel drive side, there's your half shaft here with those two 14s on top, and you can just put that breaker bar right in there and just pop your axle out. So this one's usually pretty easy for some reason. Going into the transmission, maybe this is the one spot on a front wheel drive that things are harder, because the transmission just has the shaft go all the way over, and then you got to pop it out right here. It's like a little bit of a pain. This side is going to be, I haven't done it yet, your exact same disassembly process for the strut and everything. And then your axle is right here, and you can just kind of sneak, kind of annoying on the all-wheel drives, sneak your pry bar in here and pry it from there, and it just takes a good pop and your axle will come out for you. So that's the axle removal on this car, and we're getting pretty close to having this transmission out now. All right, so this half shaft here, I just pulled it, and I'm remembering now, if you deleted your AC like I did, they make a spacer that you can buy, and every time I've taken this off, I've never thought I had to buy it. That spacer for me happens to be 2 washers from the hardware store and 1 ARP head washer. For some reason, that's the right amount. So half shaft just slides out with no hassle when you have those 2 bolts done. Usually both 14 millimeters. I had a 15 in there because I had to replace a bolt. Now I'm remembering how much of a pain in the butt this driver side or passenger side axle is. So with our, and front wheel drives, easy as cake. All wheel drives, the only way I've been able to do it, and I just got it done, is to stick our pry bar. You see how there's the curve like that, right? Stick our pry bar, curve in to the axle, and push downwards and out. And you'll just barely catch that lip, and you'll have to do it 100,000 times before it finally goes, but it will go. If you have front wheel drive, it's just you're done. Okay, so you've made it to this point. The axles are out. Pretty much everything is detached. You know, we got our slave cylinder off. I haven't done that ground cable I talked about yet, so watch me forget that and have a heck of a time. Next thing you're gonna wanna do, all you have left connecting is your transmission mount, which is these 2 bolts. They're either 17s or 19s, I don't remember. These 2 bolts are holding your transmission on. So you pull those 2 out, then you have 4 bell housing bolts. You have 1 here, 1 there, 1, you'll see it here. It's hard to see through there. It's right there. Really easy to get to, hard to look at from up top, but you go under the car, it's right there. It's a 14 millimeter, so 14 millimeter, 14, 14. Then you have 1 on the back side of the motor that is a smaller bolt. I'm going to go ahead and unbolt some stuff up here. I'll show you that bolt. It's a smaller size bolt so that it can go through the block into the transmission facing this way. Okay, so what I went ahead here and did, I took out the 2 transmission mount bolts, and I took out these 2 top bell housing bolts. So the only bolts that are holding this thing into the car anymore are the 14 millimeter on this side and the slightly smaller bolt on that side. Obviously the spline going into the motor and the dowel pins on either side. We'll talk about those dowel pins more later, they're very important. But I pretty much just have these 2 bolts, so being on a lift makes things a little bit easier for me. I'm just gonna lift it up, put a transmission jack under it, zip out those 2 bolts, pull the transmission off. So I'll show you when we get underneath what the bolts look like, where they are, and that final step in getting this transmission out. All right, we're back underneath the car. Just by where your slave cylinder was, here's your other 14 millimeter bell housing bolt on the other side here. And this is the one thing on this car, once you have it taken apart this far, that's easier than a front wheel drive car, is this bolt right here is our other bolt. It's smaller than the other one, so it can go through this. This is threaded, so you gotta make sure you get a bolt small enough to go through this into the transmission. If you forget this bolt, if this bolt breaks, if anything happens to this bolt, you're going to have weird clutch alignment issues. I had it happen for months where I was blowing clutches repeatedly because this bolt was stripped out. This bolt's very important. Make sure it's there, but it goes opposite way into the transmission instead of into the motor. But yeah, essentially we're just going to pull those 2 bolts with our transmission jack under here. Then we'll be completely free. We can just pull the transmission off and lower it. So I'm by myself at the shop today, or else I would have somebody film for me of that process, but it's just me here today. So if I run into any snags, I'll let you know about them. Alrighty, here's the transmission out of the car. I told you guys everything correctly, except before you come near trying to remove this, there's a bracket that goes right here. Just goes right there. It only sticks out, you know, like an inch or 2. It's this bracket right here. It doesn't stick out that far, but that bracket is the difference between taking the transmission down and having the weight of the transmission on your arms and freaking out because you think you might drop it and who knows what. So take that bracket out. Also take that motor mount, just these 4 bolts, they're 14s. You're probably gonna have a narrow wall 14 on an impact. Just take that motor transmission mount out. It'll make your life easier. I'm gonna take it out before I put the new one back in. Wish I did, but you know, that's how you learn, right? I shouldn't be learning, I'm the one making the video. Well, here we are, we're all learning. Transmission's out, and I got some things to swap over. I'm gonna do these seals right here. On Rock Auto and other websites, they have some kind of different part numbers for these seals, because this side, the driver side seal, is vastly different. It's this kind of press and seal with this notch from the passenger side seal. Actually, I do have them. Ignore the messy shot, please. Here, so this is the seal, I believe, for the driver side. This is just the AutoZone Duralast, but it's actually the same part number for the national seal too. I'm impartial, I've never really had problems with either. So they had AutoZone ones in stock, and then here's the other side here. They had AutoZone ones in stock, so I just went ahead and bought those. But those are the transmission seals. Mine's a 92 manual transmission. So we'll get both those seals replaced on the new one, and then we'll start swapping that in pretty soon here. But yeah, that's the transmission out. Make sure to take that bracket out. I would take, well, poop. You know, that's life. I'm glad that's the old transmission. Oh, here's what I was talking about with dowels. I think one of them stayed in the transmission. One goes here, one goes here. And little dowels to line up your motor. Jeez, I just dropped the transmission. Those will make it so that everything actually sits right and your clutch works right. And so make sure you get those dowels in. Well, I'll go take care of this mess, and I'll be back with you when we're ready to reinstall. All right, I got this transmission. This is my replacement transmission. It should be about ready to go in the car. I had to swap over a few things it was missing from the previous owner. This shift arm was just held on these 2 bolts, and then that slides off. So I put this shift arm on there, it was missing. I had a more complete shift linkage bracket assembly. I ended up putting that on there, swapping that over. Something I want to touch base on really quick is with your clutch fork. There's a pivot ball back here, which I already assembled back in there. Actually, I'll take it off so you can see. Oh, maybe I won't. Holy cow. Yeah. Okay, I just throw a bearing off. So there's the clutch fork assembly. That just comes right out. Here's your pivot ball. Something you'll read about on the forums is shimming your pivot ball. And this is something that I've had really good luck with. Kind of DSM clutch systems are known to not do a very good job disengaging sometimes. Sometimes it's you have an aftermarket master slave cylinder. Sometimes it might be air in the line. Sometimes it might just be that the system's old and the valves aren't working good. Something you can do to combat all that is to throw a washer behind this pivot ball. So it's a 14 millimeter socket to take that off. I do it on all my transmissions. Worst comes to worst, if it's over adjusted, I can just go ahead and either reduce the size of my slave cylinder push rod, or the pedal linkage actually has adjustment for this as well. But this is the most pain in the butt one that you can do, and there are times that you adjust all your other adjustments out and you don't have enough and you need this shim in there, and you have to take the whole transmission out to put that shim in. So I recommend just put the washer in, adjust around it, and if you ever need it, you have it. I usually need it pretty much every time I put this together. So I got new seals in the transmission on both sides, just like we talked about. And I'm ready to put this clutch fork back on, put my clutch release bearing back on, and then get this guy back in the car. All right, here you can see our new transmission assembly ready to go back in. If you need to do any clutch work, obviously this is the time to do it. If your disc is bad going out, save yourself the hassle, spend the money on the clutch disc. I recently went through mine, so I know my clutch is fine. These are these dowels I was talking about. There's two of them. They just slide right in the block. Just put them right there and don't worry about them. But yeah, if you don't have those in there, you're gonna regret it. You're gonna end up redoing the job. So just make sure you put those dowels in. All right, just got that transmission yoinked up in there. Not gonna lie, that was terrible. I don't remember them being that bad. And maybe it's all-wheel drive, maybe it's, I don't know, but that was honestly not a fun experience at all. I found the thing you gotta do, I tried pretty much every angle. The thing you gotta do is pretty much, if this is the transmission, this is flat, you wanna tilt it down like this and feed it up in there. So, like that. That was the only way that ended up working for me. I tried turning the transmission and putting it in and turning it back, and it still wouldn't line up. And over here is where you run into your issues. It's just so tight. But yeah, just go from the bottom straight up at it, and then just tilt that transmission, put it straight up and tilt it into place, and that'll actually get you there pretty easy. So right now I just have it sitting on there, not in the healthiest way, just by the bolt here and the bolt there going in the other way, and the dowels. So I need to put that transmission support back on, get the rest of my bell housing bolts in, then we will be well on our way to wrapping this job up. Just a side note on this, when you do get the transmission in, the very first thing you want to do is crack a Shasta Tiki punch. This is a sponsored video. My buddy Nick bought the Shasta, so he sponsored me technically. I don't think I've told him, but I do owe him a Shasta now. He has them in the work fridge, so thank you, Nick, for making the world go round on this one. Okay, here we are back up top. Our transmission mount is installed, 14 millimeters, 4 of them, and then the two 17 millimeters torqued down to the Ugga with an impact. Seem to be holding on there good. We have our starter reinstalled back there, and I have my kind of more custom starter wiring off of a battery bus bar that I put together for my battery relocation. But just don't forget your ground cable. Factory one's in the same spot. It's right here on this starter bolt. And then there's usually a coolant water pipe holder, unless you're not naturally aspirated. But usually there's a water pipe holder right here. I don't have it on my car, but just make sure to put that back on if you have it. Got the starters in, transmission mounts on. So now we're just back to, oh, and I need to make sure to retorque that smaller bolt that goes in the other direction on the back of the transmission. But we are just now into reinstalling our slave cylinder. Luckily we don't have to bleed anything because we never took anything apart there. Here it is right here. And then we can put our axles back in, we can put our transfer case back on, and we can start working on those kinds of things with reassembly. Okay, sorry I kind of went a little MIA on the recording. Running out of daylight, got to get this thing finished up. We got our axles back in. Don't forget your axle nuts and cotter pins on both of these. Two 17 millimeters on the struts and the hose clamp back on the hose. Axles, they just push in and pop in. Same deal on this side. Axles in, everything's done up, wheels back on. Next thing I'm going to do is drain the transmission fluid, just for anything that might be in there. Put brand new fresh stuff in it. We got our cross member back up here. We got our exhaust back on. We got our transfer case back on. Those all just went on the exact opposite of how they came off. So nothing too super wild to try to remember with those. The exhaust is a pain. What's new? I saw a guy on YouTube do red RTV to seal it. I'll see how it goes. I've always had exhaust leaks on that flange, so definitely worth a shot here. But everything is pretty much back together. Just about ready to rock and roll. Just got to swap my fluid really quick and then we'll see what it does. Alrighty, well, the car's back together, the transmission is in. I figured you guys didn't need to see, you know, putting back on my intercooler piping and my intake tube and stuff like that. But yeah, I hope this video helped you out. Yeah, it's all finished up. Thanks.